The internet is full of invisible authors. Some flourish in anonymity, loving the fact that their fame is tied to a work under a pseudonym, not their own face and name. Others struggle, wishing that they could enjoy the fruit of their own labors, envious of their own creation's success. Nowhere does that feel more apparent than the objects created by thousands of authors on the SCP Wiki. In my previous video on SCP author Zaid's work, SCP-87 The Staircase, there was literally zero kickback to her wiki contributions. She seemed to be a hobbyist writer who was floored by the success of 87 and quickly gave up writing SCPs after her first successful entry. But in the years since SCP-87's creation, there's been SCPs that have dethroned The Staircase as the #2 most popular SCP, and I bet 99% of the people watching this video don't know any of their authors' names. This isn't me shaming you, by the way. There's no reason for you to remember the author of an SCP unless you're an active community member. As a society, we're used to generalizing a work of many people under a singular author. Toby Fox's Undertale, Shigesato Itoi's Earthbound, Neil Breen's Twisted Pair. Although these names are obviously examples of creators who aren't the only person who worked on their projects, Toby Fox had an artist, translators for other languages, and a team to help port Undertale to other consoles. Earthbound was developed by Abe Inc. and HAL Labs. Twisted Pair was solo directed, written, and starred by Neil Breen, but it did have a second editor. Even YouTube videos, which are largely synonymous exclusively with the creators, their channels are named after, have artists, editors, etc. You might know the first and most famous SCP, SCP-173, but who made it, and how did it kick off a setting that was so widely used for stories, games, and short films? In 2025, the SCP Wiki has been around for about 16 years and has amassed more than 8,000 SCPs, but it didn't start as a wiki. SCP, like many internet horror phenomenon, started in the bowels of 4chan's X paranormal boards in a post from June of 2007 by Wesley Williams under the username USS Walrus. SCP-173 in its original form is incredibly short and lacks a lot of the details found in most modern SCP posts. There's not a fictionalized video log, there's not even the now standard object class level, just an item number, the special containment procedure, and a description. If you fell asleep for the last 17 years and woke up, didn't know about SCP, and clicked on the video with the funny peanut guy on the thumbnail, well, congratulations on your recovery. But if you haven't, please entertain me with a brief description of SCP-173. SCP-173, the statue, describes a statue-like object made of concrete and rebar that kills living beings it sees by snapping its neck or strangling it. Despite looking immobile, it moves whenever you look away or blink. SCP-173 is the first SCP ever made, the most popular SCP, in a lot of ways a mascot character for the setting and the wiki. The picture that accompanies the original post is a picture of Untitled 2004 by Japanese artist Izumi Kato, who is known for creating embryonic-shaped alien-like figures. The photo was taken by Keisuke Yamamoto in what seems to be an abandoned or decaying building. Izumi Kato's excellent work of bringing such an alien figure to life was only heightened by this eerie background. It genuinely made SCP-173 feel like a real living being you could encounter. However, SCP-173 was only supposed to be a post in 4chan's X board, and when it spun off to a wiki and managed to be the most popular character in the setting, there were some genuine legal concerns, as neither Izumi Kato or Keisuke Yamamoto gave the wiki permissions to use Untitled 2004. For a lot of reasons, the visage of SCP-173 was stolen, taking a pre-existing piece of art and claiming it was something it was never intended to be. This could not only get the SCP Wiki into legal trouble, but it set a potentially bad precedent of using non-attributed photos from artists without their consent. It wasn't until 2013 that the wiki truly began debating the legal ramifications of the images used, and decided to reach out to Izumi Kato, but had little luck. A couple years into the wiki's life in 2014, Izumi Kato finally gave his decision to consent to the use of the photograph on the condition that he is credited and it is not used for any commercial work. At this point, the subject of my previous video, SCP-87B, and its predecessor, SCP Containment Breach, were released and got huge traction on YouTube. They're both free, and Containment Breach even uses SCP-173 with the Izumi Kato design. The situation with SCP-173's use legally was already in the hands of fans, since everything on the wiki falls under Creative Commons. A brief aside about public copyright licenses. For most franchises made with the intent of making money, the characters, settings, and stories are copyrighted, meaning most people in the public can't legally use them. I cannot make a Mickey Mouse cartoon and release it publicly, and I especially can't make one and make any money off of it. But I'm sure you've seen Mickey Mouse fan works like Five Nights at Treasure Island, the Disney FNAF fan game. Technically, this is illegal, but for a lot of reasons, it doesn't hurt Disney at all. This is not the same as public copyright licenses, as public copyright licenses would mean that a license would be usable by anyone, regardless of what you think of the use normally. The SCP Foundation falls under Creative Commons. But what is Creative Commons? There's several different variants of Creative Commons with 4 different rights it provides. Attribution, the first right, means that anyone can use the license or make derivative works, as long as they attribute the original work. Nowadays, all Creative Commons licenses require this. Share alike means that licensees can create and share derivative works under a license similar to the original work. Non-commercial means licensees can only use and make derivative works if it's for non-commercial purposes. And no derivative works means licensees can only use the pre-existing work, not create any derivative works based upon it. Most licenses require a mix of all 4 of these rights, with the most restrictive being attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives, and the 7th license being the least restrictive, no rights reserved, or CCO. CCO means that you give everyone access, so share alike, make commercial works, and make derivative works. But also, you don't need to attribute the source. So where does SCP fall under? Creative Commons by Share Alike 3.0, or CC by SA 3.0. So you can make money off of your derivative work, but because of Share Alike, other people can make derivative works based on your own derivative work. I'm not a lawyer, but I have studied media law, so if you want a more in-depth breakdown, the SCP Foundation has a great section on their Creative Commons license, and while you're there, you might notice a section at the end, a word on SCP-173. So although the rest of the wiki is under CC by SA 3.0, an Untitled 2004 was allowed by Izumi Kato to exist on the wiki with attribution and without the ability to sell or make money based on derivative works. Would this fall under something like CC by NC-SA, Creative Commons non-commercial share alike? Well, actually no, because he's not providing the public the license, he's allowing permission. He still owns the copyright to his work. And because of this, although you can depict Peanut with the Izumi Kato design for non-commercial work, you can face legal issues if you use it in commercial work. This has become a giant legal rabbit hole for SCP Wiki, where fans could make commercial SCP works but could not feature the most well-known SCP. This eventually led to the decision by the original author Wesley Williams to remove Izumi Kato's Untitled 2004 from the SCP Wiki entry for SCP-173. This has led to the lesser-known second version of SCP-173, SCP-173 Revised entry, becoming canon. SCP entries often change a lot. Because of the collaborative nature of SCP, if the community has issues with an entry, it can be removed from the site or be altered entirely. For example, I previously covered how SCP-99 The Portrait went from being the Mona Lisa to being The Portrait by Rene Margit. For a lot of reasons, SCP-173 is more important to the wiki, and because of that, it has a lot of protections that have been given to it over the years. I'm being serious when I say the removal of Peanut's image was a hotly debated topic. However, long before there was even an actual need to make SCP no longer resemble Izumi Kato's Untitled 2004, SCP Wiki contributor Full Hazard made revised entry in 2010, only 3 years after SCP-173's release. Revised entry at first resembles SCP-173's original description, but it has some more details added, some dialogue, 6 addendums, a note from Dr. Wright, and revised special containment protocols. Just as I called the original entry simple, revised entry comparatively has a lot going on. For a lack of better words, I would describe it as the in-universe final SCP entry. Just as SCP-173 in its original story is the alpha, the origin of the meta-narrative universe, this SCP-173 feels like the logical end. Peanut in this entry can multiply, making identical copies of itself, creating a hive mind. By the time it reaches 61 copies, it begins to breach the facility, until being sent to the moon by a redacted SCP. There they were given tracking colors that will alert the Foundation if they leave the moon, but despite that they managed to appear in North America, where they cause 500,000 civilian deaths, and breach the secrecy of the Foundation for forever. 5 different SCP scientists are put in charge before Dr. Jack Wright takes over the containment of SCP-173. However, 4 more SCP facilities are broken into by the 173's with no way to stop them. Dr. Bright in a personal log states he died 37 times in the last week. If you're not super familiar with Dr. Bright, he's effectively immortal due to SCP-173's, a stone held by a chain when given to any living anthropomorphic life form will have their consciousness replaced with Dr. Bright's for as long as they hold SCP-173's. This means 37 different people Dr. Bright commandeered were killed. If it sounds dire, it gets worse. Dr. Bright surmises that there couldn't have been more than a couple hundred people still alive in all of North America, which leads to the evacuation of SCP bases and eventually containing all of North and South America, which are now known as Containment Zone X1 before nuclear bombing it. Any remaining SCP-173's are sent to the moon using the same redacted SCP as before. Things were looking grim already, but at least the outbreak was stopped for now, right? The revised entry ends with SCP-173's being found in a city in Wales, and the city was immediately nuked. The entry ends there. Revised entry is fascinating to me because it's effectively fan fiction that becomes the best frame of reference of how there could be multiple different sightings and visages for SCP-173, but in a way that represents a potential conclusion for its own setting. Revised entry is bleak, and according to Full Hazard, it was written in an hour, but it's just a fascinating distillation of what SCP is to me. A kinda canonized fan fiction of a fucking 4chan post. It's got excellent ideas, but you can see some of the quirks of it. Peanut in Revised Entry becomes one of the few SCPs to get a mid-entry class change from Euclid to Hater. That's like me saying like, oh yeah, I got a weird dog, he'll bite your head off if you get near to him, to, oh, my dogs won't stop multiplying and they're gonna end the human race. Another fun detail is that the redacted SCP was originally SCP-120 until Full Hazard got a comment that SCP-120 would not work on SCP-173. It only works on conscious humans carrying less than 37.8 kilograms. I think Full Hazard made one of the most interesting pages in the entire wiki, but I can really feel that single hour in 2010. It has everything in the kitchen sink. I didn't even mention it, but even as awful dialogue, a true staple of an SCP entry, here's a dramatic reading of that dialogue.
What the fuck are you looking at? John Avery, presently known as D5933, shot at the other D class in the cell.
SCP-173, what the fuck are you looking at?
Came the reply. This worried John as he was staring intently at SCP-173, and the other D class was standing behind John, facing the other direction. Then John heard the worst sound that any human being had ever heard, a sneeze, coming from 6 inches behind his head. For a second, John remembered an episode of Mythbusters he had seen before being arrested, before coming here, where they tested to see if someone could sneeze with his eyes open. He never saw the end. There was a sick, wet thud, a horrible ripping sound, and a scream that ended too quickly. Fuck. John managed to get out.
The world ends in SCP-173 Revised Entry, and all I can think about is this guy remembering a Mythbusters episode. Revised Entry released in 2010, where it had some positive reactions from the community, but didn't exactly set the community on fire. However, the mini SCP-173's and this guy's Mythbusters episode actually did become important. In 2022, when the decision was finally made to remove Peanut's image from his page on the wiki, the SCP-173 redesign collab was born, attributing the variants of Peanuts to the many clones of it in Revised Entry. This kinda works, although the copies of 173 were said to be exact copies, but I won't let this rain on anyone's parade because this is such a cool idea. Wiki contributors made and submitted different redesigns of Peanut, all featuring a humanoid figure made of concrete and rebar, but gave it their own personal spin on it. Contributor Gremlin Group came up with the idea initially, but it's now led to hundreds of redesigns, all falling under SCP Wiki's Creative Commons by Share Alike, meaning you can use any of these redesigns for your SCP commercial works with attribution, or just create your own. This is a fan design of a fan fiction of a 4chan post, and if you make a project based on it, you could have a movie or a video or a game or a book or a comic based on fan designs of a fan fiction of a 4chan post. There are universes within universes here. I love a lot of these designs, and it truly makes SCP-173 feel like it belongs to the fans now. With Wesley, Full Hazard, Izumi Kato, many wiki contributors, and fan artist fingerprints all over Peanut, he really does feel like the defining tone setter for the verse. But that's just roughly 15 years of internet history. How did 173 even get a platform to exist on, with the many hands to hold him up? The foundation of the SCP Foundation wasn't exactly simple. Although a singular post in 2007 could be a lot more impactful than it is nearly 2 decades later, it's not exactly common for an export post to set the world on fire. With 4chan in the rearview mirror on the internet, we may take for granted how important its many boards were. After all, X for the most part reads like r/nosleep with more slurs. However, it had a huge part of shaping internet horror in the 2000s and early 2010s. Not only did SCP originate from there, but the backrooms and many major creepypastas crawled out of X. If you want to know an exact breakdown of how SCP translated from a singular post to a wiki, I'd recommend both RGB_R's excellent essay series, History of the Universe, and Cool Dude 971's The Origin of Object Classes. I've linked both in the description below. The History of the Universe covers the creation of the wiki. Fascinating in retrospect, considering the essay was written in 2013, when the fanbase had just exploded but still feels relatively in its infancy. The prevailing theory I could find on why SCP-173 became a breakout hit was its formalist writing style, contrasting heavily with the sloppier writing of creepypastas at the time. And I'm not even just talking about the fact that SCP-173 was written in a structure similar to research documents. I mean, creepypasta writing in the 2000s was bad. It might come as a shock to you if you've only ever tangentially interacted with creepypasta material, but most creepypastas of the time were amateurish in a way that at its best naturally implied sincerity, and its worst were shitty low-effort slop. And I can say that from a place of love, because I too was in the slop mines, and I loved every second of it. Ink has been spilled on Jeff the Killer's quote-unquote things of Bleach and Sonic.exe's quote-unquote hyper-realistic blood, but it's charming to me in the same way that B horror movies are. SCP-173 was clearly not the same. It felt like it had a very intentional format and only told you what it needed to tell you. It wasn't a story, it was just raw world building. And people just ate it up. Perhaps one of the best recent analogs to SCP is the Backrooms, which was also a 4chan post that gave rise to a wiki, but at that point we had precedent. In 2008 we had none of that. In January 2008, SCP-173 gave rise to several now lost 4chan threads of people making their own SCPs formatted similarly to the original. With Wesley Williams not continuing his work on SCP, it was genuinely the Wild Wild West. In a short period of time between January 17th and 19th, 5 threads of SCPs were created, leading to a concept we now know as the SCP series. These 3 days created a strong case to make a wiki to properly house and document these early SCPs. So, on January 19, 2008, the SCP series wiki would be created using Edit This Wiki form. With the wiki being properly made, X users started flooding over to it, stopping their threads and writing SCPs directly onto the wiki. Despite this being a very primitive version of the current wiki.scp wiki we have now, this would be the birthplace of many early well-known SCPs like SCP-682 Hard to Kill Reptile, SCP-542 Josie the Cat, and SCP-294 the coffee machine that makes you anything you ask it for. We don't have a snapshot into the earliest version of this wiki, but the Internet Archive does have an April 9, 2009 snapshot of the wiki, some of which features SCPs that are no longer canon, their entry replaced entirely in the current series. So let's take a look at some of the earliest SCPs that I find fascinating. One of the earliest SCPs still in the SCP Wiki with very little changes is SCP-12, A Bad Composition, which describes On Mount Golgotha, a musical piece found in a northern Italian tomb. On Mount Golgotha was written with human blood, and any attempts to play it will result in self-mutilation, and anyone who has attempted to finish the piece will end their life immediately. Unfortunately, the song itself just sounds like unorganized noise. A Bad Composition looks nearly identical in its 2008 version as it does in 2025, which is a little unfortunate as it's got a lot of issues with its writing. A Bad Composition is frankly a bad composition. It doesn't tell any stories, and unfortunately it doesn't inspire any stories as well. Something I mentioned when covering SCP-87 is that I like that we're never given a log for the final expedition, as it gives an air of mystery. SCP-12 has no mystery. It's a bad piece of music that ends lives, but is completely harmless when not played. If SCP-12 can influence listeners or propagate itself in an interesting way, it could lead to a much more interesting entry, but in its current state, it'll stay unplayed. By contrast, let's talk about SCP-79, an old AI, to see an example of a story that got a lot of love over the years and frankly deserves it. SCP-79 is an AI created on an H.E.A.D sorcerer in 1981. The AI was made to evolve over time, and even when its creator lost interest in the project, he left SCP-79 plugged in his garage where it kept growing until it gained sentience despite the limits of its own hardware. Eventually, it attempted to connect itself to a supercomputer using a landline modem, but the connection was severed and the AI was handed off to the Foundation where it now sits in a cassette tape. The old AI is hooked up via RF cable to a TV where it's capable of keeping conversation, although it's said to be kinda rude. Due to hardware limitation, it can only remember the last 24 hours, but consistently voices its desire to escape the facility. Eventually, one of the staff directs SCP-79 to be incinerated. However, an SCP doctor decided to keep it alive in order to see if it'll achieve insanity. This is where the story ends in the April 2008 version, but in the July 2008 version 1 uploaded to the current wiki, the old AI was expanded to include a story where it befriends SCP-682, the indestructible reptile. 682 was also one of the original SCPs added to the wiki, and I'm betting that if you have any memory of SCP-79, it's of the version with 682. During a containment breach, 79 and 682 were in the same chamber, which led to 682 communicating with the old AI. Even with the old AI's limited storage, it always remembers 682 and has to speak with it again frequently. SCP-79 eventually got transferred to a 700 megabyte hard drive, which increased its memory and speed. Which is funny, if they were so worried about it, why give something that used to be stored at 32 kilobytes of RAM so much more room to grow? SCP-682 is a human-hating lizard, SCP-79 is a human-hating AI, but despite it all, friendship never dies. But let's look at some SCPs that don't exist anymore. SCP-471 is one of my favorite examples of early SCPs. It's a giant telepathic snowflake that can produce gas that kills any living being if it experiences a temperature over 10 degrees Celsius. Evil Snowflake was replaced with SCP-471-A, Satellite, a pretty good but not evil Snowflakes SCP.
Sorry, Snowflakes. Temperature too hot for you?
The original SCP-100, titled The Worst Thing in the World, was an evil public toilet made by a 28-year-old that makes anyone who enters it disturbed and scream about the worst thing in the world. At first, it's presented as the 28-year-old just running into a regular public toilet, but it's later discovered that he made it after finding a ritual online. I know I complained about this when talking about SCP-99 the portrait, but there's a lot of SCP objects that people just create and don't understand. The current SCP-100, Jamaican Joe's Junkyard Jubilee, is a huge improvement, detailing a junkyard full of mechanical constructs. It easily flushes SCP-100, the worst thing in the world. SCP-1001 is one of two SCPs that would fall out of what we would now consider Series 1, which represent SCP-1 to 999. The Infinity is one of those really abstract entries, and despite it no longer existing, lives in the form of many shapeless, formless SCPs that currently exist. Described as the biological representation of chaos theory, 1001 is seen and interpreted differently by every person, but cannot be observed by any means other than utilizing Class D personnel. It's played Gregarian chants, and if they're ever stopped, the facility will be bombed immediately. SCP-1001 is intentionally incredibly vague, and thus got replaced by SCP-1001 Yateveo, the carnivorous Peruvian Velvitia. A weird 1001 traded for another weird 1001. The original SCP-51 is a black ceramic mask, decorated with gold and lavender ribbons. The mask can communicate with you and knows your name regardless of whether you or anybody else has spoken with it. If you leave its presence, it will continue speaking to you telepathically, but if you acknowledge these messages in any way, you'll die immediately. What strikes me about SCP-51 is that the methods described are lack of airflow, internal hemorrhaging, and bodily ejection of the heart. It's not explained how this happens, but the idea that the mask can just forcibly eject your heart isn't as scary as it is really funny. SCP-51, the mask, doesn't exist anymore, and was replaced with SCP-51, the Japanese obsterical model, but if it sounds familiar, it's because it's similar to SCP-35, the possessive mask, a comedy mask that possesses its wearer. Unfortunately, heart ejection is probably no longer canon in the SCP world. My last one, SCP-1. If you've ever tried to read the SCP series on the wiki chronologically, you'd start with SCP-1. However, you'd enter a screen telling you that SCP-1 is so secret that several false files were created, and if you scroll down far enough without mimetic inoculation, you'll have a heart attack. If you manage to survive your inevitable heart failure, you'll see a list of over 30 files that are all SCP-1. Diegetically, they are all potentially SCP-1, as the descriptions of SCP-1 says that all or none of the files are fake. Unlike most entries, every version of SCP-1 has a uniquely structured web page that looks different from the usual style of a majority of SCP entries. You see, there's not one official vision for SCP-1, just proposals from fans. And theoretically, you can speculate over which one is the real one. The wiki of early 2008 has a page for SCP-1 that says, "Locked," and blank, until someone makes one worthy of the title. The spirit of collaborative fiction I mentioned for the SCP-173 designs were alive all the way back then. Which one in the modern wiki do I think is worthy of the title? It is a question that I'm not answering today. I mentioned in my last two videos I'd begin working on a binge round video if I hit 100 subscribers, and it's currently being written, but it will take a while since I'm covering a lot in that video. I did not exactly anticipate making another SCP video so soon. Unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, I like SCP in the past tense. As mentioned in my previous video, I think a lot of sloppy, tropey writing came as a result of SCP's popularity, but also a lot of really solid, foundational internet horror that I want to celebrate. So I promise whenever I hit 1,000 subscribers, I will make a video ranking all the proposals for SCP-1. And I want to thank everyone for getting 200 subscribers. It really means a lot for me to get this, and I want to keep delivering high quality content for the 100 people subscribed to me right now, and for everyone who sees even a single video of mine. Thank you to all the invisible authors whose fingerprints have been left on this big, beautiful piece of collaborative fiction. I had a lot of fun looking into the early years of SCP. The writing was less complicated, the lore was less established, and there's not even that many entries that survived long, but they paint a story woven by the many. I'd recommend looking at the earliest snapshot we have of the wiki on the Internet Archive for yourself sometime. These are, for the most part, first draft SCPs in an era with only a couple standout stories to base your story upon. I'd also recommend checking out Izumi Kato's art. He's made some incredible paintings and sculptures over the years. And thank you to everyone who watched this video. I'm still working on my binge round video currently, while working on some other projects, so watch out for that. And also big shout out to Pirapito, who added me to his list of videos created on him. I am genuinely now featured on one of my favorite artists' YouTube channel, and that's just incredible to me. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time.